Hi, my name is Osiel, and the topic today I will be discussing about is COVID-19 and global supply chain challenges. First of all, this first slide is titled COVID-19 and what it reveals about global supply chains. To get started, globalization is structured and similar to comparative advantage. It's basically based off of that, or it follows the same concept. This is when countries produce like not just one, like the variety. They produce resources or just items that other like consumers, let's say China and the US or in other countries, everybody produces everything, but it's the same process, but for the producers it's more affordable to make, and then from that they sell it to other places and like there's profit. And well, the main goal for this is to reduce the cost to make and at the same time improve efficiency. Well, during the pandemic COVID-19, we saw many downhill events, mostly um corporations closing down, like factories, like clothing or just I guess accessories, mainly that. Exports, like I guess nutrition, same thing, clothing, objects, were limited in many countries since I mean it was a sickness and rarely anyone could go outside since no one wanted to get sick, obviously. And medical supplies and materials were available but hard to obtain in many countries, since an example would be the US and China. Since most products and most resources come from China, the US depends mostly on them, but during the pandemic, it did not go so well. Since the sickness was more I guess, progressing or more effective over there than it was in the US at the time. And when there were shipments and when people came from over there, the sickness, I guess, was contagious and then didn't go so well. Moving on. Slide number two, the reality of COVID-19 versus comparative advantage. Comparative advantage basically advises countries to produce what they make and like what they easily make instead of like what they they keep time to make something. So mainly produce what they do like in a normal basis or just usually what they're good at, and then trade to others. This would create lower financial costs for global output, meaning they could easily produce this instead of putting too much money in something they're not really sure if they could like make it. And then US companies transported productions. Even these were like, I guess, these were medical supplies to other countries like China to be affordable and less like less costly. During the pandemic, since the US mostly depended on China, products from factories weren't available since they shut down due to the sickness and deaths coming up. Medical supplies were limited, like short term, they use as PPE, which is protective equipment. This would be like suits, like gloves, masks, things to protect themselves, like in surgeries or just medical procedures, which the US lacked at this time. But they try to make it work. But since most of the resources and items we needed, or the US citizens, anyone, since the US needed, were limited, and it was harder to keep track of. Moving on to the next slide, can outsourcing be considered? I believe it can and it should, since going to these reasons. Scientifically, and experts say globalization is endless, meaning it will never end, since uh, the supply chain is basically all over around the world. But since globalization is basically impossible to change or to end, the supply chain can be edited or not edited, but changed and just be more effective all over around the world. This means to not rely on one country since it will lead to problems like the example I said so about the US to China, since most of our products that people sell, which is gain, like this laptop, the laptop I'm using, it's most likely from China. The AirPods I'm wearing, most likely from China. Resources we do need, like machines, like of course a laptop, or clothing, obviously. It We depend too much on China, and that shouldn't be a thing. It's good to have agreements and just, I guess, relationships. Not relationship, but like more as a we the countries trust each other. That's good, but not being too dependent on one country than another. The production can be spread all over the countries or bring closer, meaning um, countries can produce and trade all around the world. It's not just two countries, it's not limited. It could be anywhere in the world. Some ways to be smart and financially stable would be to be more considerate of buying things, buying items, buying resources from other countries instead of one. That's the main goal, the main reason outsourcing should be considered. And the US should be more worried about medical supplies and have backups in case of, well, pandemics like the COVID-19. It could, any other pandemic could happen. It's not really known of how many sicknesses or how many dangerous causes could happen in the world. So I think it should be. There are strategies for the future, like depending on. Okay, okay, thank you. Sorry. There could be some strategies for the future, like depending on more than one supplier, since it was clearly seen that China was one of the most affected countries during the COVID-19, and this should mean that they should rethink their producers and how they trade or how they gain resources. As relating to this strategy, buying and trading should be closer, meaning the needs or the resources some one country needs should be near them instead of like the US is like not close to China. It's like I can't measure, but it's like here's US and then here's China, like like across the globe, basically across the earth. So it should be more closer, like Mexico and US. But since there's problems right now, we can't really guarantee that. But it should be something like that: the US and Canada, Mexico, like somewhere near there, not all the way across the world. Um, yeah. Moving on to strategy, key items should be made and produced in country, meaning the key resources and items we need should be made in the country, every country, not just the US, every country. Since like the pandemic happened, it was hard to obtain what we needed. This should be a strategy they should work on, since like let's say growing crops or like medical supplies, they should find ways to like produce that or to make it so they don't have to depend heavily on another place, if that makes sense. Having backups and emergency stocks, that should be a great one and a big one, since, well, for example, the medical supplies, if China, Canada, any other place is not available to the US and they need supplies, there's not really any like second pathway or just another way they could follow a procedure or do what they have to do. And if they have like a backup or emergency stocks, they'd be like, "Oh, we ran out of this, but we have this as a backup, so that should be like helpful." Another strategy is partnering with other countries in case other supplies aren't available, meaning the same example with China and the US. If China's not available, there should be another country the US should think of or be depending on, like somewhere near. It could be like China, but it should be somewhere near to be more helpful and more accessible. Okay, moving on to the conclusion. Global supply agreements and the chain were helpful, honestly. But even though Even now they are, obviously. But during serious and dangerous times like the COVID-19 pandemic or any other pandemic, they were weak and in danger. So that should be something that should be worked on by the not just the US but everywhere around the world. Short shortages for resources like food and supplies were limited, like PPE, personal protective equipment, or clothing, or just our basic needs were limited. So that should be worked on. The strategies I believe are the most concerning or more the main ones would be depending on other countries instead of just one. It's not, I'm not suggesting that depending on just China or depending if any case on China is a bad thing. I believe it's helpful and it's a good relationship or a good bond they have, but it should be more than China. And to have backups for supplies like emergencies or pandemic, that should be one that should be, I guess, like a priority. Since let's say like an example again, the U.S. and Canada, like, they go back to back resources and everything. But what if one day China can't supply, like, produce that, or in any case transport it? Where would the U.S. obtain what they need, right? I think that should be a main thing they should think about. But hopefully you take something from this. Here's a quick summary. Basically, during the COVID-19 pandemic, the U.S. saw how they depending on just one country, which was bad, since sometimes they couldn't have resources. If they did, they were limited. If not, they were unavailable, and they should just rethink of their strategies. So, and if, like, in any case, there's another pandemic, they won't suffer the same challenges. Maybe some, but not the same. But that's all I have today. Thank you for listening to my presentation, and I hope you have a great day. Bye bye.